Hello, fellow watchers. Welcome to episode 2 of my Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie overview, the 1992 classic starring Stephen Root. Read the description below for timestamps on what I will be covering in this installment. Episode 1 talked primarily about the movie itself and my impressions. Episode 2 will be an overview of a key interview with Mr. Joss Whedon, the writer of the original screenplay, and how he felt about the movie. Also, I will cover key elements that will try to suss out his strongest opinions on the production, especially with his perspective on certain cast members, and try to determine if his views are justified or not. If you haven't watched part 1, that's fine. If you've seen the movie, then you can still follow along without even watching part 1. Isn't that great?
That's all it takes.
For those that haven't seen the movie, be aware there will be spoilers. Let's dive a little deeper into the behind the scenes of how this campy near disaster was fraught with missteps and clashing talent creatives. What were Joss Whedon's thoughts on the movie based on his screenplay? Since this episode will constantly reference the screenplay, I will frequently refer to it as the sacred text. That way, we know I'm talking about the original writer's source instead of just saying screenplay ad nauseum. So with that, let's start cracking.
Release the Kraken!
It got made, not, was different. I imagined more of a horror movie.
An interview from September 2001 with Mr. Whedon was full of little nuggets of knowledge where he didn't hold back on his impressions of the production, its cast members, and how it felt to have a creation written by him get translated to the screen. It would be safe to say that he wasn't all that happy. At first, Whedon said he had major involvement. I don't know, what does he sound like? Let's just go with this. At first, Whedon said he had major involvement. I was there almost all the way through shooting. I pretty much eventually threw up my hands because I could not be around Donald Sutherland any longer. More on that later, fellow watchers. Stand by. He continued to say it didn't turn out to be the movie I had written. They never do, but that was my first lesson in that. I saw a director with a different vision than mine, which was her right, it was her movie, but it was still frustrating. Wait, he just said he has a different opinion about something for a person's project, yet he acknowledges they have a right to their own opinion? Wish we had more of that kind of attitude these days from people. So, where was I? I would say in Whedon's defense, it makes sense for any writer to have misgivings about someone else's interpretation of their material. One of the most famous examples is Stephen King's anger with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. That example is timeless because that movie has become a timeless masterpiece. But King, who had only a handful of his works made to film at that point, may have been taken aback by just how much the movie was different from his book.
I love the little son of a bitch.
Stanley Kubrick made it apparent that his desire was to make a film loosely based on the book, but cared not about being faithful to it. Like any artistic creation, that piece of art means something to the creator. But once it's out in the world, anyone else that takes in said art has their own interpretation of it. So, Buffy the Vampire Slayer ended up becoming something that was drastically different from Joss Whedon's personal vision. It's not the first nor the last time that happened to his work. For example, he also wrote the screenplay for Alien Resurrection and hates that movie with a passion. He felt that a French director that spoke very little English had no idea which lines were supposed to be funny, and the tone and intent of his work was misinterpreted by an auteur with French sensibilities who didn't understand what Joss was aiming for. I listened to half the dialogue in Alien 4 and I'm like, that's idiotic because of the way it was said. Nobody knows that. Nobody ever gets that. They say that was a stupid script, which is the worst pain in the world. Oh my lord, what were they thinking? Well, at least we don't have to be reminded of the worst part of Alien movies past. Oh no. No!
No! God, please, no! No!
Whedon also made examples of his attempts to punch up scripts during the 90s, yet he always felt that he was misinterpreted once things came to the screen. So, when it was time for his sacred text of Buffy the Vampire Slayer to come to the screen, Whedon did spend time on set for most of the production to advise and observe, but he was never happy with the direction it was going. Most especially, he hated everything that had to do with Donald Sutherland. He was just a prick. People would always make fun of Rutger Hauer, but I have to give him credit because he was there, he was into it. Whereas Donald was just, he would rewrite all his dialogue and the director would let him. He can't write, he's not a writer, so the dialogue would not make sense. He would go on to say, Sutherland was incredibly rude to the director and everyone around him, and to see him destroying my stuff, the thing is he acts well enough that you don't notice, and his little ideas about what his characters should do, he was actually destroying the movie. So I got out of there, I had to run away. Yeah, sure, he hated Sutherland's performance and claims old Donnie rewrote the dialogue to make his own take on stuff that fundamentally changed the character in Whedon's eyes. But did he really?
It got made, not, was different. I imagined more of a horror movie.
After reading the sacred text, it is quite possible that Sutherland may have had a hand in changing a lot of key elements to his character, possibly. Let's break down key scenes that are drastically different from source to the screen. But first, I'll make note of many key changes in how Buffy and Merrick's relationship develops in the sacred text that managed to be excised from the film itself. By removing several interactions as written between Buffy and Merrick, it fundamentally changed the mentor-student relationship. Earlier in Whedon's screenplay, Buffy made Merrick change his outfits to be more modern and less all about wearing black. There's even a whole try out clothes in the changing room montage like you get in all those wedding movies and rom-coms. You know the type I mean. Merrick tries out trendy new outfits that obviously don't look right on a stuffy old Englishman. That's so funny. This was intended for comedy while also punctuating how well they begin to trust and listen to each other's advice. The sacred text also emphasized Buffy's gradual metamorphosis in dress style. As the second and third acts progress, Buffy starts to wear less makeup. She switches to more loose-fitting and practical clothing that still has some style, but is more conducive to maintaining physicality in a fight, physical range of motion, and so on as a Slayer. This further drives home the influence they both have on one another. Of note, this is very subtly portrayed in the movie. If you know about this detail, it's easier to notice if you pay attention. This goes in line with her eventually distancing herself from her friends as she recognizes the banality of their banter. She's maturing and starting to grow up when taking control of her new responsibilities.
A couple of weeks ago, I met this guy.
Oh my God, you're having an affair?
It's not about that. He's like old, he's 50.
However, These transitional phases for the characters go mostly ignored or unnoticed in the movie itself. Whedon's input during the referenced interview about his woes didn't directly address story subplots that were removed from the movie itself. It seems like he puts most of the blame with story changes on old Donnie Sutherland's personal vendetta to make Merrick his own creation. Whedon mentioned, "To see him destroying my stuff, his little ideas about what his character should do, was a detail that he felt was destroying the movie." I did notice that Merrick was usually fiddling with objects, shifting clothes or making movements to upstage to bring attention to his performance and distract from the scene itself. The little totem in his hand when they first meet, does that have some kind of historical or mythical meaning or something? Who knows? Maybe old Donnie knew, but we can't ask him anymore.
Damn!
When they have their bonding scene and talk about what it means to be a watcher and a slayer, he's slowly and quite intentionally taking his sweet, lovely old time untying his shoes and fiddling around, only to then mention that he would be a wonderful bootmaker.
Or maybe you'll just get a job.
Oh, a job. I would have been a wonderful bootmaker.
This whole scene is completely different than the original screenplay, so Joss may be onto something here. During this boot fiddling scene, Buffy listens closely to Merrick and he says,
I train girls to be slayers. I have done so for 100 lives, and I shall continue to do so.
I am born each time with the knowledge that my purpose is to prepare the chosen one for her backing. He then hints that Buffy herself is exceptional. That causes Buffy to let her guard down and openly talk about her goals for the future, making him tea, and the two of them even share a joke. It's a slightly tender moment, and at that point the movie establishes that they are starting to meet eye to eye. Aw, isn't that sweet? But let's compare that to the original scene. In a nutshell, as I post this scene as written up for your eyes to peruse, Merrick says that he's trained 5 slayers who have all perished. He was from a family that have trained to be watchers in Hampshire, near Stonehenge.
What's the meaning of Stonehenge?
There are small bands of families across villages that still carry out their mission as watchers, but it's a fading art. He then says that it would be best to maintain a professional relationship and try not to be friends because it only makes things harder for both of them. Very different scenes with very different results. The movie's version of the scene strongly suggests that they are getting along much better, and they reminisce, and then 10 minutes later, there's another scene between the two that starts when Buffy insists that she needs to go to the game and be a cheerleader because she already missed 3 practices and people would start to talk. Merrick, with his back turned, says,
None of the other girls ever gave me this much trouble.
This is spoken as he is sitting in a chair, his back to her, looking frustrated. Buffy says,
And where are they now? Hello.
spoken with haste, impatience, and a minor hint of spite. This is a significantly truncated dialogue exchange compared to the sacred text. Also, it devolves their relationship back to Act 1 when they were at odds and having a bit of a challenge working together. But only a bit of a challenge. This scene pushes their antagonism beyond ludicrous speed.
Sir, had you better buckle up? Buckle this! Ludicrous speed! Go!
They've gone to plaid.
The tension in this interaction is quite jarring. It feels pretty whack within the movie's narrative to devolve so late in the story like that, with no actual payoff, making this hostile exchange purposeless. This confusing shift is exacerbated by how the scene was staged. They are literally refusing to look each other in the eye and talk face to face. In the original text, the scene went as follows. Another distraction. It's not right. Why? Because it's not my fate? It's not in the book of all knowledgefulness that I'm going to be cheerleading at the barber game? Sooner or later, you're going to have to accept it. Your fate. I'm pretty much learning not to accept anything anymore. Come on, Merrick. Football. Afterwards, we can kill and kill until there's nothing left. All right. Toasty, you should come. It's going to be a great game. Oh, I'll be there, all right. I'm not letting you out of my sight. Not till you're ready. Try and be inconspicuous, okay? Act like a fan. Football is my life. You're learning slowly, incredibly slowly, but you're learning.
None of the other girls ever gave me this much trouble.
And where are they now? Hello.
After that, she smiles as she runs up the steps. So she doesn't intend her comment to be spiteful. It was just a way to mention that she has her thing to do, and she even invites him to be a part of it. This exchange is less antagonistic in the original source. Presenting so much discontent between the two in the movie manages to muddle Buffy and Merrick's relationship arc in odd ways. It comes off as she's just sick of his controlling nature and he is sick of her attitude. These two scenes, when watched in the movie, become tonally uneven due to the changes in dialogue as well as setting. There was a lot of unwarranted aggression, so in the screenplay, Merrick agrees to let Buffy go to the game. He defers to her suggestion, showing leniency because he trusts her decision and gives in. With clever editing and some ADR, which is audio made after filming, they could have used some of the footage from that scene to remove the hostility between the two, soften up that anger and spite, to allow the audience to see them working together for the same common goal, and reinforce that they are now a team just before the big showdown in the upcoming act. This could have been fixed when Buffy says, "And where are they now? Hello?" Only to turn around and smile at him as she walks out the door, perhaps? Or if not that, then have her trot towards the door, but then slow down just a moment and look back at Merrick with a little bit of shame for saying such a thing to him. Then when she leaves, maybe he could do a wry little smirk of approval. It would tell the audience, oh, okay, so they're comfortable enough now to rib on each other and not take it personally. Okay, that's cool. How about that? Simple but effective. I could understand that Whedon would hate Sutherland's input and proclaim that it made the movie worse because those changes are not an improvement, not to mention the fiddling. A little while later, the aforementioned basketball scene begins. In the sacred text, Merrick arrives at the football game wearing a Letterman jacket and baseball cap. Donald Sutherland shows up wearing a cloak and black hat, like usual, fiddling with his handkerchief. Fiddling again. Soon after, Merrick dies, in the screenplay and in the movie. The original demise of Merrick goes as follows. Merrick is approached by Lothos after Buffy steals a motorbike. Lothos lifts Merrick by the neck, asking where Buffy is. Merrick is holding a pistol behind his back. Going back to Buffy, she senses Lothos is nearby and bolts into a run to find him. Lothos says all Slayers are the same. One more pathetic bitch begging for me to suck on her clotted heart. Merrick says, this one may surprise you. As Merrick looks out at the trees, he sees Buffy running towards them. Lothos threatens to enslave Merrick for 100 years, and Merrick says, I don't think so. Bang! Right in the brain pan. Buffy stops and slinks back into the darkness, shell-shocked. Then she takes his body to the outskirts of the graveyard, buries him, and has an excellent funeral procession. Buffy really is a gift to your Google list, if I say so myself.
A what?
A Googleizer, one who speaks at funerals.
In the movie, Merrick stops Lothos as he attempts to entrance and turn Buffy. Merrick yells, no! And he gets a stake through the heart and he dies a slow hero's death. Not without his speech, while fiddling with a hanky during his death. Because, well, why wouldn't he? If it was Mr. Sutherland himself that pushed for a different demise, then we have additional evidence of Sutherland's meddling from Whedon's sacred text. I could say that Whedon was truthful about Sutherland destroying his movie, but that would require me to disregard two key things. First, the movie deviates from the source material even outside of Merrick's scenes alone. Lothos in the movie is a much softer, less threatening character compared to the insidious monster portrayed in the sacred text. A lot of his evil dialogue and violent nature is tamed in the movie. He is a declawed husk of the dark and menacing portrayal from the source. I feel it might be a disservice to proclaim outright that Whedon's perspective isn't caught with a little bias because old Donnie irked him. Secondly, other actors did their own thing along the way. Of note, a lot of Paul Rubens' scenes were improvised, which also altered a lot of the tone of the movie compared to the source. But then Whedon said this about Paul Rubens: "He is a god that walks among us. He's one of the sweetest, most professional, and delightful people I've ever worked with." He would say to me, "I'm a little worried about this line and I want to change it. I realize that it'll change this other thing, so if that's a problem..." I'm like, did I just hear an actor say that? Huh. So Sutherland changes Merrick's lines and stuff, but what would Joss have thought if he had talked directly to him about making those changes? Would that have eased Whedon's disposition a bit? But of course, if the other claims about the old man's behavior on set is true, I could see how that would compound his frustrations against the guy, but it's not really for me to judge either way. I just like to think about where he's coming from, but not play for or against his views from ages past. In my opinion, I feel the biggest disservice to Whedon's original story is because they removed a lot of Merrick and Buffy's gradual unspoken respect for one another. That to me is more of an assassination of the character than Whedon's apparent bemoaning about Sutherland being a dick and rewriting all his dialogue. I feel that in the end, old Donnie making changes was allowed as much as Paul Rubens was given creative freedom for his scenes. Yet Whedon bemoans one actor's choices and praises the other? That kind of ruins his comments about Sutherland ruining his story. Sutherland is not the only guilty party, but Joss basically says that he was a major contributor to lessening the movie's potency because he's, quote, not a writer. What then say we about Rutger Hauer and Amelin being so different as well? It goes back to my comment about this becoming a movie that lacked proper planning and was derailed due to an inexperienced project lead. If the director doesn't have a clear plan and a decisive hand with the cast and crew, then of course the ship will be steered off course. One final mention before we end this verbose and lengthy section. Whedon's original screenplay, if made into a movie, would have been rated R, or at least a hard PG-13. It's quite nihilistic in parts and has some fairly brutal moments. It's interesting to see the evolution from script to screen for projects like this one. That's all. I found revisiting this movie an interesting experience, more for the behind the scenes than for the movie itself. I enjoyed finally taking a small glimpse into Joss Whedon's perspective on writing. Granted, this movie isn't intended to be a pure horror tragedy, although if they made this movie with a harder edge, that would have made things a lot more interesting. My main takeaways from this movie itself is the focus on themes of friendship, hard work, and learning to realize there's more to someone than first impressions may apply. I would like to think that Buffy at the end of the movie is changed from the beginning. The next time she goes to a movie theater, she'll be quiet and enjoy the show. But of course, this isn't the end of Buffy's story, not really even the beginning. Joss Whedon would become the lead show creator for the TV series in 1997. It had a strong underground following from the start and eventually blossomed into a prominent and well-loved series that has inspired projects to even today. What is the purpose of all this lengthy meandering? Well, Joss Whedon is out of the storytelling visual medium, it seems, at this point. But the way he used humor during tense and high-stakes moments without breaking tension was honed and crafted over several years.
Hiding under the shepherd's skirts, that's a manful scheme.
You want to run this ship?
Yes.
Well, you can't.
His ability to get a group of characters to come together, each with wildly different characteristics, who ultimately learn how their differences makes them stronger as a whole, started really with the Buffy show. That all seems so common and old hat these days, but it was heavily inspired by the way the show itself had presented this cliche. Buffy is the beginning days of his snarky humor and eclectic style, but it was infantile and unrefined until one day it wasn't. But he kept experimenting in the Buffyverse for years to include Angel. It's not perfect, but I love how you can see the attempts made to do something different, and at times it failed miserably. But eventually he was getting more hits than misses as the creative team and cast started to wade through the challenges of a precarious balancing act. It was perfected in Firefly.
Well, isn't that special?
Whedon's understanding of action set pieces built within the context of conflict and purpose become more nuanced and confident over the next 15 plus years. Whedon could start a story with a simple MacGuffin, but then he would find ways to put a spin on your perspective of that object's purpose, only to surprise you with a deeper understanding of its place within the entire tableau of the story he is telling. He would emphasize strong female characters. So tired of hearing that these days, right? But they also had flaws and weaknesses, and weren't afraid to rely on those around her to build them up to higher potential. Characters created under his watch have motivations that work consistently with what you'd expect them to do based on what you know of them.
Tell me if your precious Brandy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned to life, would you have done it?
If not for yourself, if not for her, and for every one of the million people in that city, innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them, innocent or otherwise.
And also, he was able to tap into the darker side of human nature and human connection, and how all of that can be represented through any medium. In his case, it was usually through horror comedy, but not always. These key elements of his writing style took literally 20 plus years to ripen and mature by the time he made The Avengers in 2012. He had thousands and thousands of pages written under his watch, with hundreds of hours of TV shows and movie material under his belt. He was a seasoned veteran once The Avengers made him a household name, and it set the stage for not just the MCU to attempt to replicate his style, but a lot of TV and movies since then. Sadly, the writers and show creators over the last 15 years that have been tasked to copy his style rarely have the understanding of what made it work, nor the experience to do it right. I am of the mind that even Joss Whedon didn't have it right for several years. It took me a long time to finally sit down and give Buffy a chance. I had to stubbornly sit down, kicking and screaming, into finally giving it a fair shake. Give Buffy a chance.
Go spit.
It was a really rough first season for me to get through, but I stuck with it. I had to sit through 1.5 seasons of torture before the soothing balm of season 2's finale finally hooked me in. I experienced a paradigm shift in my perspective, and I was hungry to see what else would come from Buffy and Friends. I went from misery and melancholy of the experience to devouring every season with enthusiastic, childlike glee. Ultimately, Buffy's greatest contribution, unbeknownst to her at the time, is getting made so that someone else entertained the chance to tell more of her story. And that, my fellow watchers, was the beginning of a decade-long adventure that allowed Joss Whedon to become the legend he is today, for better or for worse. How would I feel about the show after 17 years of being away? Would I like season 1 at all instead of not at all? I remember very little about the series at this point, but key episodes emotionally devastated me in ways words cannot express. After going through entire seasons with a group of characters, you get to know them. If they experience heart-wrenching tragedy, loss, or death, it can hit you hard, like losing your favorite pair of socks. So join me, watchers, as I embark on a journey into the past. Perhaps I'll get a lengthy lesson on how Mr. Joss Whedon managed to build a legacy, from this movie to television to more movies and beyond.